the best of the week on Relevant Radio.
Pope Francis gave his annual State of the World address, as it's been called. It's really his foreign policy speech. All of the ambassadors to the Vatican from all around the world, all kinds of territories, and 184 countries the Vatican has diplomatic relations with. A real chance for him to speak his mind on a number of issues. And his comments specifically on the issue of surrogacy. Surrogate mothers went viral, covered by every major news outlet, including the New York Times, Washington Post. And here to talk about this on the Cale Clarke Show is the Director of Church Management Programs at the Bush School of Business at the Catholic University of America. Father Robert Gahl is my guest today for the first time on the program. Father Bob, thanks for taking the time. How are you?
Thank you, Cale. It's great to be on your show.
Absolutely. It's so good to have you here. Well, Father Bob, for those who may not know exactly what the problem is with surrogacy, first of all, could you explain to our listeners? I think most people have an idea, but what exactly is surrogacy? What exactly happens during the process of surrogate motherhood?
Pope Francis came out with a statement yesterday condemning surrogate motherhood and asking that there be an international prohibition. And in that venue, speaking to 184 diplomats representing basically all the countries on earth, demanding this prohibition of surrogate motherhood. It was really powerful, and it warmed my heart because the way Pope Francis, the way he explained it, really indicated his appreciation for the teaching of St. John Paul II as the Pope of the family. Yeah. And that this is very much rooted in the family and marriage and respect for the human being. But most essentially, and this is really what's at stake here, because people who seek surrogate motherhood, which is, there's many different techniques that can be used, but it always involves having a woman somehow impregnated or somehow conceive first an embryo and then a fetus, and that she signs a contract from the beginning such that she's going to relinquish her maternity over this child that she's bearing within her uterus, within her womb, which is a tremendous violation of her motherhood, of her femininity. It's really making her own body an object of commerce. It is a kind of slavery, but it's a kind of contractual slavery in which the person consents, normally due to duress that they're experiencing. In fact, and this is, Pope Francis is very attentive to this, oftentimes those who contract a surrogate mother are doing so from a wealthy country, and they're seeking out women in poor countries. Sometimes we're in very difficult situations, even trying to feed their own children. And with that difficulty of impoverishment are taken advantage of by these international companies and the buyer who's purchasing her for 9 months so she can carry to term the baby. And then once she gives birth to the baby and she looks the baby in the eyes, she has to hand him over because she signed he or she, the boy or the girl, over to this other family. And then what kind of a family is it? Depending on the country, in the United States, we're really Wild West. We don't have any restrictions on this. So it could be an individual. It could be a same-sex couple. And then there's also the issue of legal paternity and how they are recognized. So, of course, what the church teaches regarding this, and this was developed under John Paul II, is that every human being is made in the image of God. And every one of us has infinite human dignity and should be respected. And none of us can be treated as a mere instrument. And what happens here, though, is the other feature, which is the tragedy of infertility of those couples who, a mother and a father, a husband and a wife, who would like to have a baby, and they're not able to conceive for whatever difficulty that they're experiencing. And given that difficult situation, sometimes they'll turn to adoption. Sometimes they'll simply seek their fatherhood, their motherhood in some other endeavor, like in education, teaching, and apostolate. But sometimes they seek a baby through this route. But what the church teaches is that we can never make a human being an object of commerce. We have to always consider every child a gift from God. And each one of us, in fact, is deeply a gift from God. This is crucial that we acknowledge this, that all of us acknowledges that our very being is a gift, and therefore we can give ourselves back to God. And this is really the teaching that Pope Francis announced yesterday, which is really a cry for justice around the world.
And you mentioned the connections that Pope Francis has with in continuity with JP2 as the Pope of the family, but also he used another phrase there, Father Robert, in his text, he mentioned another very, very powerful line that was coined by JP2, the culture of death. And that very much factors into this, especially in the case of IVF. IVF is obviously one of the methods by which surrogacy is achieved. Talk about some of the moral issues involved with this practice, because there are so many Catholics out there, forget about people outside of the church, Catholics that see nothing wrong with this type of procedure, and speak to the moral depravity of this.
Right. So you bring up the details, Cale, regarding IVF, which of course represents in vitro fertilization. And the Catholic Church distinguishes between homologous, and heterologous in vitro fertilization. And homologous or homologous is when the gametes, so the sperm and the egg cell, are coming from a couple who are married to one another. And that's, in a sense, that's the best possible scenario of what is already a tragic situation, where people are using a method that takes the place of the marital embrace, which is an expression of love between the husband and wife, and they're using a technical means, and other people are stepping in and taking over the role of reproduction from the parents, but using the seed, so the gamete from he and from she, in order to then develop this baby within another woman. So one of the problems here is there's a multiplication of maternities. Like we can ask, well, who's the mom? And well, is the mom the donor of the egg? Is the mom the one who signed the contract that she's paying off this woman who's carrying to term the baby? Or is the mom the one who's carrying to term? You can have at least 3 moms in this way. And you could also consider, well, what about the doctor that's doing the in vitro fertilization? Or what about the doctor that's doing the implantation? Because they do the in vitro fertilization in a laboratory and it's in vitro, so it's in basically a petri dish. But then later they look for the right timing in order to do the implantation within the surrogate mother. So each of these steps, you could have a woman involved or a man. You have these multiplications of who's the mother and who's the father. And all of this requires some recognition in law, because every baby under law is born, and the question is birth certificate, or who are the parents? Who's the mother? Who's the father? So I mentioned the homologous and the heterologous fertilization. The heterologous is when you go to a donor. So you can have a sperm donor, you can have an egg donor, you can have the surrogate mother. And so right there, there could be 3 people who have nothing to do with the commissioner of the contract, who are those who intend to become the parents under law. That's often how it works in the United States, that there's some celebrities who, without going through pregnancy themselves and without knowing who the father is, it may just be a sperm donor. Suddenly they have a child, and a child was born from a surrogate mother and from a sperm donor, perhaps also from an egg donor. So all of this is a commercialization of the human being, treating the human being like an object. And Pope Francis rightly called it trafficking in persons, and therefore it should be an international crime.
This is intriguing, because I want to read to you a paragraph, which you know very well, obviously. It's a piece from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is paragraph 2378, which says that a child is not something owed to one, but is a gift. The supreme gift of marriage is a human person. A child may not be considered a piece of property, an idea to which an alleged quote-unquote right to a child would lead. In this area, only the child possesses genuine rights, the right to be the fruit of the specific act of the conjugal love of his or her parents, and the right to be respected as a person from the moment of his or her conception. So I do think this paragraph really does focus on the key issue when it comes to whose rights are really at stake here.
There's a great passage from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and speaking about rights, what this is all rooted in is ensoulment, or the spirituality of the human person. This the wonderful gift that we are not merely bodies, we're not merely animals, but we all have a spiritual soul, which means that each of us is created from nothing by God. Of course, our bodies are, furnished from the biological material from our parents. And this is why with human beings, we don't speak of reproduction, but of procreation, because the human parents participate in creation. This is how the Catholic Church appreciates human sexuality so much that it considers it something divine, participating in God's creative act. And this is because the human being is an image of God. We are like God. And with the Christmas message that we're just concluding with Epiphany and so forth, that we share in God's nature, that each of us is a spark from God, that we are children of God. And therefore, for a parent to say, of their child, that they somehow own them or possess them or can somehow make them in a lab, would demean the meaning and the rights of all of us. And this is where Pope Francis is combating what he calls the throwaway culture, which is what Pope Benedict called the dictatorship of relativism, where people say, well, I want it, so I'm going to get it. And that's the idea of, well, I'm going to buy a child. I'm going to pay for it in the market of surrogacy because I want to have a child and I have a right to a child. Well, if that's allowed, then everyone can be considered a mere object of other people's possession and their desire.
There are probably some people out there, maybe people who have engaged in surrogacy. They have children they've obtained through surrogacy, and maybe at the time they didn't think there was a moral issue with it. What would you say to a couple who might be listening right now and only now maybe realizing the grave moral error involved in what they've done? What would you say?
So this is also an issue, of course, for those who have participated in vitro fertilization. And of course, what we believe is every human being is a gift from God. Every human being is an image of God. However we were produced, let's say, however we came about, if we came about through the plan that God has designed, which is that of the marital embrace of love, or if it was through this kind of possessive technical process that supplants the marital act, that person who results, that child, is always of infinite dignity and is an image of God, and therefore they must be loved. They must be loved really as an end in themselves and for their own sake, which is how all good parents love their children.
Yeah.
They don't love them the way they might love their pet, which is, oh, well, I like it. It's nice to be around. It does these things for me. Sometimes there's two. I know some people have a very deep affection for their pets, but for our children, it must be as an end in themselves destined to eternal life, whereby parents love their children so that they might be in heaven with them forever. And this is why marriage is indissoluble, because it's forever, because every human being is to be loved that way because we represent God. So if someone has used one of these techniques that replaces or supplants the marital act, it's good to recognize that error and that mistake, while at the same time one can embrace the gift that one has received, because the gift is always from God. Life is always caused by God in cooperation with technology and human beings. Hopefully, primarily through human beings, although also, we can use technology. We should use technology. In fact, the church is probably the organization in the world, the institution that most encourages the development of science insofar to really help fertility, not supplant fertility, but to assist fertility. There are many in the scientific world who immediately run to, well, let's do IVF if there's a problem with that, with fertility. Whereas what the church recognizes, well, let's see if it's on the male side or on the feminine side or both, man or the woman, if there's something that we can do to assist, to cure some issue of infertility. And very many times, in fact, there are marvelous clinics in the United States that are doing just great work in this area, that are curing women so that they can overcome issues of fertility that often have other implications of their own health. And this is just a wonderful contribution where there are many children who've come into the world on account of these cures and on these therapies that assist marital love rather than replace it.
Yeah, and that's a great distinction to make, Father, about technologies that assist God's gift of marital love and conceiving a child. And you're talking to a guy who struggled for many years with my wife with infertility. We were able to achieve pregnancy, kind of not through any of the techniques that are morally illicit, just by God's grace, really. But what are some of those organizations? If somebody is struggling with that and wants to go about achieving conception, childbirth in a morally licit way, what are some of those organizations that Catholics can look towards?
Sure. One of them that is probably the most well-known and the most major one is originally based in Nebraska. That's called the Creighton Method and the Creighton Clinic. That has a network of doctors, gynecologists, OBGYNs that are formed in techniques that they deal with in helping so many features of female health, and including in this area of reproductive health, in order that they can, so many have been graced with the opportunity to have children. It's also true, like I know couples who even taking simple supplements, and it could be on the man's side, that in particular there's some supplements that a man can take that can enhance his fertility. And I know there's so many cases when the child is recognized as a gift from God. There's often a life of prayer that's associated with the desire for a child, recognizing a child as a gift. and beseeching from God through perhaps a powerful intercessor. Could be Our Lady, could be one of the saints, could be St. Joseph. And I know of a case of St. Padre Pio being the intercessor. And not only did a baby ensue, but multiple babies subsequently.
Wow.
Due to Padre Pio's powerful, miraculous intercession and some supplements.
Yeah, that's right. And hey, we've got to use the natural means as well as the supernatural. That's for sure. So people should talk to their doctors. And hey, another saint that helps in that regard is Saint Jose Maria Escrivá. We asked for his intercession before we achieved our pregnancy with Michaela. And so got to shout out to Saint Jose Maria as well. Give him some credit there as well. This entire episode of The Cale Clarke Show is available on the Relevant Radio app. The Relevant Radio app is completely free and updated daily with fresh articles, podcasts, and prayers. Don't delay. Download the app today, and thanks for listening.